Welcome. We will start with NCRT Class 9, the very first chapter, Democracy in the Contemporary World. In this chapter, we see how democracy has expanded during last 100 years to more and more countries in the world. More than half of the countries, the expansion of democracy has not been smooth and straight. It has seen several ups and downs in the different countries. It still remains an unstable and uncertain achievement. What is democracy? So, democracy is a form of government that allows people to choose their rulers. In a democracy, only leaders elected by the people should rule the country, and people have the freedom to express views, and people also have freedom to organize and freedom to protest. However, this process of democracy has witnessed numerous ups and downs through the history. So, if we look on to, like, we can take example of various that we would be discussing in detail, or that is Poland and Chile. So, Chile is in the South America and Poland in Europe are two classic examples which witnessed the idea of democracy, but their means were different. Let's first start with the case study of Chile. Now, coming onto the Chile, you had Allende, who was the president of Chile, and the government was overthrown by the military rule during that time. Now, he was a socialist leader and he was also a leader of the Socialist Party during that time. He led the party which was known as the Popular Unite Coalition and in 1978 attained victory. The idea was to help poor and pro workers, so it supported the cause of workers and the poor. So here now on the other hand in Chile you had various landlords and there was a military coup in 1973. This was led by the Pinochet and Pinochet overthrew Allende's government. Pinochet basically killed the people and he remained in the power for the nearly 17 years. Now, after this period of 17 years, he thought of referendum. Now, in the referendum, there is a direct vote in which the entire group of people either say yes or no or accept the proposal. So, Pinochet was thinking that he would win the situation even after referendum, but this did not turn true. The Pinochet could not win. As a result, the political freedom that was there restored and presidential elections was held took place in that time. In the presidential election, the daughter of Bachelet, who was the Michelle Bachelet, was elected in the 2006, and she was the elected in 2006 and she was the first lady defense minister in Latin America, and in the contest she defeated one of the Chile's richest man. In this photograph of her victory she was giving a speech that saying to her supporters. So let's turn to another event that is took place in Poland. On the other hand, in Poland, you have the rule that was Polish United Working Workers Party, and this party was Communist Party in 1980s, and all of the East Europe was mainly under the Communist Party. Poland was one of the first countries to liberate itself from the communist rule during that time. Now in Poland, you have various shipyard workers who launched a strike. The cause was in the just behavior towards the women. And the people who were dismissed, basically the crane operators in the shipyard, so they raised their voice. And this voice was further done by the Wallachia, so who were predominantly an electrician, but he joined the strike for the leaders and his cause was to increase the pay for the workers. So the idea was to improve the remuneration that the workers are being paid on, and the idea was to release all the kind of prisoners that are in the jail, and again any kind of censorship on the press should be ended. So those were the key motives of Walesia's ideas. On to the idea in Poland, as we said, you had Walesia along with the workers. They signed a 20-point agreement, and this agreement was basically against the communist regime. And it talked about a new idea of solidarity, so with which has nearly 1 crore members. Now, there were many people who were imprisoned and were imposed martial law. So, the freedom to organize and express opinions was taken away in that time. Finally, what happened was there was another wave in 1988. And during this wave, the Soviet Union was uncertain and the economy was not good in Soviet Union. So it was basically on the verge of collapse. Finally, what happened in 1991 when it broke down into 15 independent republics? So the situation or the power of Soviet Union was gradually weakening, weakening during that time. As a result, what happened was this year came as a kind of gloom for the Poland, and they had their own elections for 100 seats, and finally, there was more than one party who contested, and finally, Wallachia became the president. So, that was the case study of Poland and Chile. Now, some of the key points, both of these, as we said, Allende preferred government control on all big industries. However, Valencia talked about market to be free from any kind of government interference and to give higher pay to the workers as they against the communist regime. And Bashir, who was again the next in line or hierarchy in the Chile, talked about middle issue, not a kind of whole government control and whole market economy, but a kind of middle path of the between two. And there are numerous such things that happen throughout the globe. These are the two cases studies we discussed in detail. And coming to the next point, the changing map of democracy. Now, as we know, during the World War II, there are numerous states which were fighting for the independence during that time. And immediately after the World War II, that ended in 1945, there are many nations that attained democracy. So you had numerous democratic nations that came up in the around 1990s and 1950s. Indeed, India is one of it which attained independence in 1947. Then you have had another name of democratic feeling that started post the dissolution or the disintegration of Soviet Union, and that occurred in 1989 and 90s. And in 1991, finally Soviet Union was just integrated into 15 republics. As we said so far, you have the map that shows in the democratic government during 1950s, and that is shown with the red colors here. Now the next map shows the expansion of the democratic region in this 1975. This region was further expanded by 2000. As you can see, many of the nations have attained democracy, and finally, in 2015, this is the situation where green shows the democratic nations. Now, what are the other key highlights to understand the idea of democracy? Has its roots long back. If we talk about France, we will understand the French Revolution. And in the French Revolution, there was the basic idea of democracy that started late after the French Revolution. However, this French Revolution made a kind of slow beginning or a kind of mental change of the people. To understand that, there has been a drastic changes that is required. Finally, democracy was overthrown number of times in the France, and final democracy came only during 19th century. And Britain started a kind of democratic revolution much before the French Revolution. However, the process was very slow and gradual. It was during the 18th and 19th century that the power of the monarchy and feudal lords were challenged in. Britain. So, there were numerous British colonies in North America which got independence in 1776, and finally we had United States of America which became democratic. And but there was one key issue: being democratic was one of the issue, and getting a right to vote was another issue. In United States, the right to vote was initially restricted to whom? Like, firstly, to the people who owned property, and secondly, women were not allowed to vote, and thirdly, blacks were discriminated to vote. So there was a kind of limited voting system that existed in United States, and some was the condition in many other nations. However, there was numerous struggle that worked around the world to attain the right to vote. So finally, we had idea of the universal adult franchise that came up, or it is also known as universal suffrage, that was launched. And these are the years for the various nations which attained or gave their country or gave their people right to vote. The first and the foremost among those was New Zealand. So by 1900, New Zealand was the only country that gave all the adults right to vote, and many of the democracies in Europe, North America, and Latin America allowed people to vote during this time. And in this time only, colonialism was also ending. So you had numerous areas or numerous nations which were attaining their freedom, and this freedom was a big push or kind of big throw for the British economy or Britain. India got independence in 1947. Later on, Ghana in Africa, also known as Gold Coast, under Nkrumah, who was the finally become the first prime minister and later president of Ghana. He attained independence, and here the military rule was overthrown during 1990s. And we had Bangladesh, and then we have Pakistan, which attained a kind of independence. However, in 1990, Musharraf brought back the army rule in Pakistan, and in 2005, the king dismissed the elected government that occurred in Nepal. So, these are the conditions during that time. However, there were kind of democracy that was attained, and then later on, military rule that came up and again shifted to democracy, and so on the so forth. That was the scenario in many of the nations as of 2015. Nearly 140 nations have multi-party elections. Now, since there are 140 nations having multi-party elections, we say the nations which have attained democracy again, that is 18 nations since 1980, have made advances to democracy, which is the huge number or biggest drive towards democracy. We talk about this democratic setup in detail. Here there is one of the classic example of Myanmar, or we can Myanmar's another name is Burma, which was previously known as Burma. Now Burma attained democracy in 1947. But there was a military coup that occurred in 1962. As a result, you had a democratic election. This was held in 1990 for the first time, and also Hong Suu Kyi won that election, but she was house arrested, and finally in 2016, a new parliament was convened, and Hong Suu Kyi became the first non-military president during that time. Aung Suu Kyi was finally awarded a Nobel Peace Prize, and she became a state counselor, which is uh, to taken taken to the prime minister. Now we talked about the democracy within the nations. So on next video we'll talk in remaining parts. Thank you for watching.